name is Lon Safko, co-author of the Social Media Bible, published by John Wiley & Sons, the most comprehensive book ever written on the subject of social media. And today we're here with Francine Hardaway, founder and CEO of Stealth Mode Partners, and we're going to be talking today about microblogging and other social media thoughts. So, Francine, it's really great to have you here today.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
This is great. Let's get started. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how far we go back and the conferences and Fast Track and some of the things that you're currently doing?
Well, I actually own an accelerator for early-stage technology companies, and I run something called the Arizona Entrepreneurship Conferences, where I raise money for disadvantaged kids who need entrepreneurship skills by providing a conference that gives value to every entrepreneurial company in Arizona, and for which they will pay into the charitable foundation that funds the programs. And I also provide entrepreneurship training through a series of grants from the cities of Tempe and Gilbert to aspiring entrepreneurs. And Lon and I go back to the 80s when I had the largest PR firm in Phoenix, and he was my client, and he had just designed the first interface for the disabled to the personal computer, or rather for the Mac, or the Apple. It was before the Mac, right, Lon?
Yeah, the first one, actually, yeah.
Yeah, so long time. How are you, buddy?
Hey. The cool thing is that you and I have been riding the crest of this technology wave for our whole careers. And I think you were being a little modest, too, because you also are a liaison kind of between the Valley of the Sun and the Valley of Silicon to help entrepreneurs and kind of share resources as well.
Yes, I really believe in ecosystems. And so I'm trying to develop an ecosystem for Arizona entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley and an ecosystem for Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and financing sources in Arizona. And there are no real financing, or very few real financing sources in Arizona.
And then that kind of leads over to your entrepreneurship conference that we do each year.
Right, and I've already talked about them a little bit. People probably don't care much about them unless they live in Arizona or are somehow interested in knowing what's happening in Arizona, but they are conferences in which local Arizona successes are brought together with Silicon Valley thought leaders and successes, and we network, and we have lots of fun, and we share resources, and we learn. And as I said, the money goes to a foundation that trains at-risk people to have entrepreneurship skills, which, by the way, I equate with survival skills.
Good point.
I don't think that every at-risk kid is going to develop a technology that will change the world, but they certainly do need to be able to think on their feet and be responsible for their own economic self-sufficiency.
See, that's terrific. And the reason that I wanted to talk a little bit about more broadly about what you do is because we do go back quite a ways. And a couple of years ago, I heard about this crazy term. I wasn't quite sure what it was. And of course, anytime I don't understand something in technology, I immediately go to you. And you explained what social media was to me for the first time. And right while we were sitting at the coffee shop, you took your laptop, you set up a blog account for me. We created the password and username and grabbed my photo and put it in. And then you said, go home and blog. And that's kind of how it all started, thanks to you.
Well, that's awesome. But and to be truthful, I've done that for lots of other people over the years, too. I discovered social media a long time ago. And interestingly enough, I discovered it when my husband died, because I was alone at night in a 3,500 square foot house, and the only thing there with me was an internet connection, which I was one of the early adopters of Cox high-speed internet services, and so I actually had broadband, so it was actually pleasant for me to be on the internet 10 years ago, which it wasn't for most people. but I discovered a site called WidowNet, and it was basically a chat room for other people that were widowed. And I basically got on and chatted and traded messages with people in my same position all night long for a year until I started to be able to sleep at night, and I was tremendously supported by WidowNet, which, by the way, still exists, and that has really taught me the power of social media. I think social media has the power to transform the world at its best. At its least, it has the power to make friends and help people, through difficult situations and spread knowledge.
And that's also something exciting we keep hearing on and on through the different interviews that we've been doing, is that social media seems like it's a brand new trend, but if you look at the word social, it really gets back to humans socializing with other humans, all the way right back to the cave people times when we did cave drawings, but just that the technology, the media part of social media.
Well, it's better tools and free tools in most cases, and broader tools. I mean, we always had community, but we weren't necessarily able to have community in China and India,
right,
with people in time zones a day away, which we now do.
And speaking of technology,
and it's pretty close to real time, I mean,
yeah.
We are trying to get as close to real time conversations as we possibly can. Global. And every social media tool takes us closer to that.
Yeah. And it's global and it is real time.
Right.
And the technology that I asked you to kind of inform us about today, I think meets that definition probably better than any of the social media tools, and that's microblogging. Can you tell us a little bit about how you interpret the term microblogging?
Sure. You know what blogs are. Blogs started as weblogs. They were personal diaries of people who were on the web in which they put up their thoughts and shared them with their friends. Well, that, of course, has completely mushroomed into something much bigger. And so now there are, oh my goodness, there's like hundreds of millions of bloggers. I mean, not all those blogs are populated all the time, but there are a great many blogs and regular bloggers, and most of mainstream journalism has gone to blogging. And for instance, when I had my hip replaced, I thought, well, there's nothing out here on the internet about having a hip replacement. Someone else may want to know this. So I blogged the entire course,
wow,
from when I checked into the hospital to a year after, so that people having hip replacements in the future would have that little piece of knowledge.
Wow.
Also, I was afraid I was going to die in the hospital from, some staph infection or some malpractice, so I wanted to make sure there was an audit trail. But that's just the funny part. But so that's blogging.
Yeah. Okay,
microblogging is talking to people in 140 characters. And the great thing about microblogging compared to blogging is that the platform, and it's called a platform because rather than somebody having to go to my blog or my blog being delivered to someone else's RSS reader, with microblogging, we are all in kind of the same place at the same time. And it's really a constant many-to-many conversation.
Okay, so microblogging is kind of like a weblog, but it's significantly smaller and it's real time. We're talking about 140 characters, is that correct?
Very close to real time.
Geez, okay. So is there so we're going to use
it. So it's kind of like the nearest thing I can compare it to is if there were such a thing as many-to-many IM.
Ah. That's a good comparison, but you're limited to...
And the difference is that you can receive all of the microblog platforms in many different ways, at your computer, through SMS, on a phone. It follows you more than a blog does.
Well, let's talk about that restriction of 140 characters. As anybody who's ever read anything that I've written, you can tell that I'm very verbose, and if I had to restrict myself to 140 characters, what comes out of that? Is that good or bad?
What comes out of it is important pieces of information linked to websites with more information. So, for instance, recycle your plastic here, http://earth911.com. You know, so you can begin to tell people things that they can finish on a website. You can direct people to things through microblogging. It all started, though, because people wanted to do things like tell their friends where they were. So, you know, I'm in Central Phoenix and I want to have dinner, and I can tweet anyone around 24th Street and Camelback, I'll be in Houston's tonight. And then people can join you if they want to. And that's really fun. Twitter really took off at South by Southwest, which is a big interactive music and film conference in Austin, Texas. And it took off at South by because people were looking for each other. And so they would get on Twitter and they would tweet, I'm at the downtown Hilton, or I'm in the microblogging session, or, you know, something like that. And then their friends could find them. Or I'll be at the XYZ bar at, 5:30, meet me for a drink.
So it's about building, again, these trusted networks, these little communities where people can follow each other through the course of a day.
They're called micro-communities, and there are all kinds of them that come from Twitter. There are political micro-communities. There are technology micro-communities. There are some guys that talk on Twitter only about things like XML feeds and JavaScript.
Yikes.
And there are other people who talk about cancer therapies and chemo side effects. And each one of these is its own little micro-community. And you find them by getting on Twitter and following someone and finding out who that person follows. Oh. So it's basically like you go through a maze of your own followers or people that you follow leading you to other people. And you can make so many new connections that way. Wow. A great example for me is I bought a house in Half Moon Bay, and I'd lived in Arizona for most of my career. And I thought to myself, well, I've got to develop a network in Half Moon Bay. I only know 2 people, my daughters, and they'll get really tired of me really fast. So I just have been very active on Facebook and Twitter and all the social media platforms, and I've developed an entire second network up there in the Bay Area.
You see, and that's so exciting. Let's talk about Twitter just for a second. That seems to be the most common microblogging platform, and everybody comes up and asks you if you tweet. What does that all mean?
The tweet is supposed to a microblogging platform in 140 characters.
Okay. And Twitter is one of the most popular platforms out there?
Twitter was the first microblogging platform in this space, although very quick on Twitter was JAIKU, Jaiku, which was a European platform. It's now owned by Google, and Pounce, which was started by the founder of Dig. So Twitter wasn't alone for very long.
Well, anything good is going to have competition.
And now there are just tons of them. And really, microblogging is interesting. You go where your friends are. Or you go, if you want to be heard, you go where the most people are.
And let's talk about that just for a second. I hear people say, how many people are following you? How many people are you following? And I have 6,000. I have 60. What's all this followers?
Well, Twitter's a river of news, and there's got to be some way to limit what comes across so that you can actually There is something called a public timeline, and that's the post of everyone. It's like a fire hose, and it's the post of everyone who's on Twitter. Most people don't really want to know that someone in the Philippines is going out to lunch because, in America it's likely to be 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
So what you want to do is find your own friends and follow them and have them follow you, and that limits the drops of water, so to speak, that come through the fire hose. Unless you are someone like me, a person who doesn't mind reading, a whole bunch of stuff and wants to make new friends. I follow something like 1,800 people, and something like 2,400 people follow me.
Oh, my gosh.
And the reason the 2,400 people follow me is because I've just been on there so long, and I post rather frequently, and some of the things I say are funny.
Yes.
And some of them are informative. So, it's useful. I don't post things like where I'm going to lunch. Mm-hmm. I post useful information, like I read this on this website, about the election or about some piece of news or medical information. I often post useful medical information, things I think people really might want to know about. And then sometimes I post things that are funny.
Yeah. And I love when you
last night I tweeted bed, period, sounds, period, good, period, crash, period. And everyone thought that was extraordinarily funny.
That's great. That's great. And I love when you go to conferences, too, because you're sitting and you're tweeting all the time, and we're getting kind of play-by-play updated information of the latest stuff.
Right. I give highlights of what the speaker is saying. So if you happen not to be there, you can join the conversation. And truthfully, a lot of conferences now, the speakers take feedback from Twitter while they're presenting, and they tune their presentation as they go. There's sometimes a big screen in the front of the room,
wow,
and it's got the Twitter feed on it for the conference, and if you post to the Twitter feed for the conference, it comes up on the big screen, and the presenter can answer your question or give you the information.
Isn't that amazing? Again, almost real time, right during the presentation, your customers, your clients, your prospects are asking you to give them what they want.
Well, and that's the coolest thing. The coolest thing is Twitter used for business, because there's a guy on Twitter whose name is Frank Eliason, but he tweets under the name Comcast Cares. And every time there is a Comcast outage, of someone who's on Twitter, you can tweet Frank Eliason. You actually tweet at Comcast Cares, and he picks those up. And he tweets back, and he tries to help you, and he acts as a liaison between you and the Comcast technicians. Huh. And it's unbelievable how many friends he has made and how much good he has done and how he has improved the customer service profile of Comcast through doing that. And then the other person who does that really well is Lionel Menchaca from Dell. Really? Remember when the batteries were exploding in all the Dell laptops? Somebody tweeted that all the Dell people who are on Twitter have these names like Richard at Dell and Lionel at Dell. So you can always find them, and they really try to be found. So somebody asked, what's with these exploding batteries? And Lionel at Dell tweeted back, I don't know, but we're looking into it. And everyone was just stunned, absolutely stunned, because they were so surprised that anyone from Dell would answer them back. And then Lionel kept on putting out a constant stream of information.
Really kept them up to date.
Yeah, exactly, until the problem was solved.
Now, isn't that amazing for a large corporation?
Yes, and so corporations and brands, Southwest Airlines tweets, Zappos tweets, a lot of brands tweet now, as a customer service tool, and it works very well.
I love that.
Because it's so real time.
Did you hear about that recent article of someone who got arrested in a third world country and grabbed his cell phone and tweeted?
Totally, yes, exactly. That's another use for it.
Could you repeat that for our listeners?
It's a great emergency tool.
Can you tell our listeners what that story was?
Well, I can tell them that I don't really know the details of that one, but I do know that when the earthquake happened in China, Twitter knew about it first, and Twitter was able to tell it to, for instance, CNN. A lot of times, Twitter gets the breaking news first and is able to spread it to the news sources and the first responders.
That's amazing. Now, we talked about all of the really cool things here, but I know that there is some kind of a drawback with Twitter and all of the other social media information that's being shot at you. Can you tell me just a little bit about kind of the drawbacks and how do you manage it and what to watch out for?
Well, what to watch out for is getting overwhelmed by information, and that's really a personal issue. You know, there are very few spammers on the social networks because the microblogging social networks because they're very easy to spot and they get self-policed. Mm-hmm. If some guy, you know, is following 3,000 people and doesn't have any followers, and he's just sending out messages all the time that say, buy my product, the system's going to find him out very quickly and deal with him.
And that's one thing I love about social media.
So spam is not an issue like it is with email.
And I love that about social media is that it's kind of self-policing really across the entire board.
Right. Right. Social media is much more self-policing than many, and you know what, Lon, that may not always be true. Yeah. It may just be because it's newer, and the community is still relatively smaller, and the spammers, you know, or let's be nice and call them the marketers, still haven't really figured out a way to, the mass marketers still haven't figured out the right way to use it.
Yeah.
But right now, it's pretty pure. And if you're overwhelmed by information, it's because you chose to follow a lot of people. Well, let's see, what's the opposite of overwhelmed? You can be underwhelmed pretty quick by only following 5 people. Then, you know, if each one of those 5 people posts 3 times a day, then you're only getting, 15 tweets a day. Whereas I get, 6,000-7,000.
That's absolutely amazing. But I
don't see them all.
Yeah, and you can kind of scan through.
They come through me on, they come onto my desktop, and if I happen to be, I've got a Twitter client, and if I happen to be looking at it, I see them, and if I don't, I see only the ones that are actually addressed to me. They're called the @replies.
Right. Right, and that's a good way
And I
of
read
filtering
those
out.
once a day just to make sure that I've answered people.
Yeah, kind of like a real-time email, but more efficient.
Yeah, and there's really many fewer @replies because many things don't need to be answered.
It's just FYI.
Yeah, it's just FYI, and it's part of the river of news, so to speak. Like CNN, like I follow CNN breaking news, and I follow Rick Sanchez, CNN. I follow a lot of people like that, but I don't necessarily read everything they say.
Yeah. It's kind of like a cell phone text message, but on a larger scale.
Exactly.
Wow. Of all of the companies that you mentioned before, such as Twitter and Pounce and all of the different competitors, a lot of people think that we might be heading for another social media bomb.
Oh, we definitely are. I mean, there are too many microblogging platforms out there, and some of them will get to a point where they can't pay the bills, and so there will be a consolidation. I could never predict which ones. JQ, for instance, is now owned by Google, so it's probably not going anywhere. Yeah. And Pounce is probably not going anywhere either because it's defined a little niche. Pounce lets you do something that Twitter doesn't, which is send what's called in technical jargon a payload, meaning you can attach a file.
Oh.
So if you want to send somebody a file and about 140 characters. Pounce is the way to do it. You can send pictures, you can share music. There's a lot of stuff you can do on Pounce that's not as easy to do on Twitter.
That is a nice little niche. That gives you a lot of extra capability. Is the
right? And Google has Google has JQ, which is a big, and then Google just announced another one, launched another one called Rejaw, which I don't understand why, but I'll just wait and see. Twitter is the one with the first mover advantage and the most people on it. There are the last I heard there were something like 2.6 million people on Twitter.
Wow.
And it was getting bigger every day. I could be really wrong even by the time you publish this.
Yeah, good point. And that's a question that keeps coming up. Are we going to be able to get the book out fast enough so that the information is current?
Yeah. Well, the information won't be current. A lot of these people will be acquired. But see, I think that Twitter, for the enterprise and for anybody, is a very, very valuable tool. Microblogging is a very valuable tool. So somebody is going to buy this smaller platform.
Yeah.
There's also, by the way, one called Yammer, which is specifically for the enterprise and just launched. And then there's another one I saw yesterday, PLEN.TY. And that's another social microblogging platform that launched that's supposed to be just for the enterprise. So, and that is just for the enterprise means you can only get on it if you are in the company, and it's supposed to be much more secure.
So they're finding their vertical niches.
They're finding their niches, that's right. And I believe that social media platforms and microblogging platforms especially are going to all end up being interoperable and being like email. Mm-hmm. Like you're on Yahoo email and I'm on Gmail and somebody else is on AOL, but we can all email each other. Pretty soon we're going to all be able to microblog each other. So you can be in your little community, which could be the people on Plurk or the people on Twitter or the people on JQ, and still speak to, when you want to, the people in the other communities. And there's a lot of conversation going on around open source and the ability to do that.
Yeah, I did have the honor of interviewing Kevin Marks from Google Open Social, and it's absolutely fascinating that all of these so-called or perceived competitors are actually all coming together with the same idea, is to be able to share information across all these different platforms.
Exactly, because there are large numbers of users on these platforms that can't really be moved. Yeah. They're not going to move. There's a certain point at which I stopped signing up for new services. I mean, I'm probably the last person because I'm an inveterate early adopter, and I can stand a lot of noise in my signal, and I don't mind, I don't mind spending a lot of time figuring all this stuff out. But your average person who has a 9-to-5 job, is going to pick a platform and stick to it. And so the job of the platform developers is going to be to make these platforms as close to real time and as interoperable as possible.
Kind of to bring this back around to the user, is the technology difficult to sign up for, to get going?
It's the simplest technology on the planet to use. That's why Twitter took off so fast.
Really?
I mean, all you do is sign your name and pick a password, and it's free.
It's free. So
there's really hardly any barrier. There may be an age barrier. I can't remember because whatever it is, I sure haven't seen it in 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah, there is some apprehension for some of the older technology users that I'm finding as I do the research for the book. But they're as interested as anybody else. They're just a little bit more intimidated because they haven't grown up on the technology.
Exactly. Well, but I will guarantee you that I definitely did not myself grow up with the technology.
Nor did I.
And I've learned it all.
You just got to, like the sports shoe slogan, you just got to do it.
That's exactly right.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add about microblogging or kind of summarize your experiences?
My experiences have been incredible because I now really understand a lot of this, the technology behind it and where the developers are going with it. And that's what's really interesting. They're going to what they call federated, which means no single point of failure. One of the biggest problems with Twitter is as it grew, it began to fail. And they had this absolutely great little symbol that they put up when the website wasn't working it was a whale.
Yeah.
And it had a bunch of birds trying to lift the whale up off the beach.
Good metaphor.
And it was like a beached whale, and it was the tail whale, and it became very famous. And so everybody became concerned that when Twitter was down, people who had grown to rely on it, like police departments and other first responders, that they needed some other place to go. And so everyone decided that Twitter was too important to be something with a single point of failure. And so that's why they want to go toward open source and a federated model where something will always be working.
And that's also a really good point. I had the opportunity of speaking with well,
how do you feel when your email is down?
Oh, I'm lost.
Exactly. So is and that's how a lot of people feel about Twitter now.
And that kind of gets back to what Google's interview was about with Google Docs and Google Enterprise, is that with the new cloud computing, that there's always that fear also that you can't get access to your software or to your data.
Right, and a federated model means that the microblogging will not only be on one set of servers or even in one country or in one city, so that it can't just all go down at once.
Yeah. Which is really the whole idea of the Internet. That's how it started.
Well, right. The Internet was founded never to go down. It was really founded as for national security.
Yeah. Well, can you tell our listeners where they can find out more information about you and Stealth Mode and some of the projects that you're currently supporting and working on?
Well, for me, I'm at Stealth Mode, StealthMode.com, and I write a blog that you can find through StealthMode.com, and my calendar's there, and links to just about everything else I do. The Arizona Entrepreneurship Conference is at AZEntrepreneurship.com. That's right, AZEntrepreneurship.com. Great. And the Phoenix Social Media Club, which I also founded, is at smcphoenix.com.
So you have a lot of spare time to read Twitters.
I read Twitter constantly. It's in my Gmail. I read it by what's known as XMPP feed, which means I get a feed through my IM client. So I see it. Yeah, it's just there. Whenever I'm sitting at the computer, it's just there running in the background.
That's so cool. Well, I'd really like to thank Francine Hardaway, founder and CEO of Stealth Mode Partners, for being here talking with us today about microblogging, social media, and all things cool. So, Francine, thank you so much for being here today.
It was a pleasure. It's always a pleasure.